How you doing, guys? It's Eric from WillTheWasteland.com. We are entering an extremely dangerous phase of the financial collapse, and that is the speed at which the government is creating money slash borrowing money. It's all the same in the system. Literally the only thing that is keeping this entire bogus system afloat is the fact that almost every other, if not every other, central banking system on the planet is doing the exact same thing, but that's not going to save it in the end. When you're falling from an airplane, the fact that everyone else is falling with you can make you appear that you're not moving or that you're only moving slightly, but eventually you slam into the ground. And there are physical limits to this. And I know some people think that, you know, the whole kind of model that everything is based on, the modern monetary theory, is that if you have the reserve currency, then none of this stuff matters, to put it simply. But it does, and like I said, there are physical limitations, and there's a reason why all these reserve currencies have only lasted about the amount of time that we have been the reserve currency. If you look back throughout the various iterations, whether it was France or whatever before that, it only lasts about the amount of time that the United States has been in that mode. And the rate at which we are creating money is insane for a couple reasons. First of all, the obviously inflationary implications of just creating that much money. Just to give you an idea, from 1997 to 2020, the national debt went from around $5 trillion to around $27 trillion. It went from $5 trillion to $27 trillion. And then in the last 3 years, just from 2020 to 2023, it went from $27 to $33 trillion. So at that rate, it would have gone up almost $40 trillion, $37 trillion in that amount of time, instead of just going up $22 trillion. And most of that increase, this is the scary part, most of that increase has been at the latter end, at an increasing rate. Not just an increasing amount, but an increasing rate. And to the point where, this is just from CNBC of all places, the Treasury is set to borrow $776 billion, so $776 billion in just the final 3 months of the year. And then, from January to March, the Treasury said it expects to borrow $816 billion between January and March. So that's another January, February, March. It's 3 months. So in the next 6 months, the Treasury is set to borrow an additional over 1.5, almost $1.6 trillion. So that is an insane amount. That is at a rate of over $3 trillion a year added to the national debt. So at that rate, if we look at the same time period, 97 to 2020, the national debt would have gone up to $73 trillion. It would have increased by $73.6 trillion. And that's why I've said in my videos, the national debt is, I said before, it was going to go to 30. It's going to go to 50, and it'll probably get to $100 trillion, because you can't go backwards in a system like this. Because if you go backwards at all, the system starts to collapse. Money literally disappears, and there's not money to pay for anything. So I'm still of the absolutely stalwart opinion that there will not be a literal default in the sense of the government just not paying of this debt, and hence the money disappearing, because everything stops. That is like what I think would be literally the worst case scenario, because everything disappears. There is no credit movement at all. There's no paying. There's no borrowing. So think of what we would have to get rid of to shrink the federal government by what now is going to be a rate of $3 trillion a year, just to get to a balanced budget. You have to cut $3 trillion worth of spending. And yes, the easy money would be not sending tons of money overseas, but there's so much that's relying on that. And also, if you shrink the economy and the government, because we all know GDP includes government spending, because that's the only way they can make it look like the country's being productive, is by counting the money that we've literally created out of thin air as productive capacity. If they somehow manage, which isn't going to happen, but if they somehow manage to cut government spending by over $3 trillion from where it's currently at the current rate, tax revenues are going to go down too, because think of all that economic activity that would be ground to a halt. And it's not necessarily all real economic activity. You know, it could be all these defense contractors and everything, just literally everything that the government's wasting money on. But it is still people getting that money, spending it on other things. It is economic activity in that sense. And that works in the short term. That's why the country is where it's at. If this whole Keynesian model didn't work at all, then we wouldn't have gotten to this point. But because of the Cantillon effect of money, that even the fake money, the person who spends it first basically gets almost full value before the inflationary effects take over. So we have a lot, and especially if you have other countries bearing the brunt of this by giving us real things for this fake money, then that's allowed us to get to the position where they are. But at this continued level of expansion, they're not going to keep taking the fake money for real stuff. Not at the same rate anyway. That's why prices at the grocery store have gone up. That's why prices of everything have gone up. But the point is, if you cut the federal budget by the $3 trillion just to get back to parity, then economic activity would decrease tremendously, and then their tax revenues would decrease, commensurate with whatever that decrease in economic activity was, which would then make their gap even bigger. And then because money starts disappearing like that, with the current system that we have, there is always more outstanding debt than there is money in the system to pay it off, because money is debt and with an interest rate attached to it, this just would cause an implosion of the entire monetary system. So we know what they're going to do. That's why they're pausing, why they're not... They're eventually going to pivot, but they want to they have to let this implosion happen first, or else the problems are going to be linked directly to the Fed. And even though they are linked directly to the Fed based on its creation, this entire system is flawed based from the moment it was created, but they still want an excuse. They don't want it to be the problems develop directly after they pivot. They want the problems to happen and then pivot, so people won't immediately blame them. And obviously people blaming them doesn't stop anything from happening, but it does hamper their efforts to roll out any new system, especially internationally. That's what the big risk is, I think, for them, is other countries deciding that they don't want to take these dollars anymore, or if they are going to take them, they want a hell of a lot more of them. So we're just going to see this increase. That $3 trillion, the $1.5 trillion that they're borrowing in the next 6 months, within a couple years, it's going to be $2, $3, $4, $5 trillion every 6 months, and then it's going to go up from there until something breaks. And it's such a complex system, especially when you add in all the international relations issues, war, the political element of changing regimes potentially, or administrations potentially in the U.S. And in complex systems, like Chris Martenson from Peak Prosperity has pointed out, you don't have linear properties, you have emergent properties. So something like an engine system, if you put an input in, you're going to get an output that is measurable. Like if you put more gas in the system, you get more power. Until, you know what I mean? Like you can measure and calculate these things. But in a system as complex as the world global financial system, when you add in politics and human interactions and everything, it's impossible to tell exactly what's going to happen. And then you have the added variable of black swan events, is something that you literally can't predict because we don't know about it, or even that it exists. And it's impossible to tell exactly where the system's going to break. And it's possible for it to last longer than you think. Like I've always mentioned, if you look back, people talking about this can't possibly get to, for people in the 70s have written about the debt being a problem and talking about what it would be like if it was 10 trillion or 20 trillion or whatever, and we've just blown past that. So is it possible we could just blow past 100 trillion? I guess it's possible, but you're seeing that this rate is increasing. And so I think we're definitely getting to the point where it's going to start becoming a major issue, because we're finally seeing that reflected in inflation and other types of monetary and financial and economic issues that are starting to break. And that's when the spiral is going to really take over. Like, yes, prices have been increasing steadily that entire time, but they were within a narrow range. They're not at this, Argentina level increase. And Carl Denninger of the Market Ticker just had a good article about how if we go the Argentina route, which is like pretty much where we're headed, that credit is no longer a thing anymore. And that just is because no one will loan money when you have a potential for double-digit or even triple-digit inflation, or just uncertainty about what the future is going to look like. You can't loan money because what you get back probably won't be worth anything. So just imagine the U.S. economy with no credit flow, no loans, probably not even any credit cards, and you can see where this is going. It's going to be really, really ugly, and I don't know if it's going to happen in the next 6 months or the next 6 years, maybe even longer. Like I said, it's hard to tell. They could keep this propped up for a long time depending on all these other things that are happening, but also something could happen that could cause this to collapse at any moment. And I'm talking specifically about the currency. Now, would a currency collapse cause the utter collapse of the U.S. economy? I don't know. We've been slowly onshoring different types of manufacture, but it's nowhere near necessary to take over if people stop selling us stuff if they decide our dollar is worthless. And I think that's what a lot of people are overlooking, is the fact that there's certain elements of this that don't happen slowly. Like the decision, like right now, the US dollar still makes up the vast majority of trade, use in trade. But I don't think that's a process that can like slowly, like you're not going to go from 90% to 95 to 50. Like people are going to decide that there's a better option, and then most people will switch to that option, I think, when something no longer becomes viable. When a bridge is built, with inferior materials, it doesn't just slowly sag until you're like, you know what, I can't drive on this anymore. You might see a crack or two, and then boom, the whole system explodes. Or to look at it more importantly, if people start seeing those cracks and then they decide to take another bridge, your traffic doesn't go down by 10%, it goes down to nothing, because people can see that it's collapsing, if they're lucky enough to even see it before it actually collapses. What I'm seeing is probably people who are going to try to stay on that bridge until the whole thing collapses and they're absolutely crushed in the rubble. What that looks like on the ground here, hard to say, but what it does mean is that you need to be prepared to exist, operate, whatever outside of the current paradigm, whether that's the banking paradigm, getting your cash out of ATMs, whatever. This is not financial advice, it's just my vision for the future, that I foresee people moving away from the dollar at slowly increasing and then all of a sudden. And I think we're definitely going to go the inflation route, because I can't see them just erasing the money and going to not paying the welfare, not paying the military, not paying the foreign wars. All of a sudden, I think that they're just going to inflate away until that dollar is absolutely worthless, and people are getting rid of the dollars as fast as they get them, because they know that it's going to be worth even less within a matter of days, if not, at least weeks or months. So let me know what you guys think and what you're doing to prepare in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I will talk to you soon.